Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Pfeffer. I'm the managing editor of Dice News, and welcome to our Dice Hangout on Tough Interview Questions. We were inspired to do this by the movie The Internship, which, if you haven't seen it, it's just come out on DVD. It stars Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson as two down-on-their-luck salespeople who managed to talk their way into an internship at Google. It's a funny storyline, but we all know that that kind of storyline isn't the real world of tech. So we thought it would be fun and instructive to bring together a panel of experts to answer some of the tough interview questions, the toughest ones that actually you could throw at us. These all came in from DICE users. So we're not only going to answer the questions here, the panel is going to provide some insight about why they're being asked in the first place.
I'm John Sumser, and I'm going to moderate this conversation. I run a website called the HR Examiner, and I'd certainly suggest that you take a look at the HR Examiner. Today, we've got an amazing panel. I think you should be seeing on your screen, for some reason, Don Rasmussen. And Don is a certified, did I get that right?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Well, Don is a certified advanced resume writer and the president of Pathfinder Writing and Career Services. So she's our expert on how you get a job. And then we have Jeremy Langhans. Can you wave, Jeremy?
I sure can.
And I understand you prefer to go by Jer.
That's fine.
So like Sonny and Jer?
Yeah, Sonny and Jer.
Sonny and Jer. Got it. And Jer is the legendary innovative recruiter. He's currently at Expedia. He's worked for places like Starbucks. And what are some of the others? Did you actually make the Obamacare website? Wasn't that part of your...
No, I didn't make the Obamacare website, but I have worked at Microsoft, Cisco, Yahoo, a lot of different tech companies up and down the West Coast here in the United States.
So why are you a billionaire?
Why am I not a billionaire?
Yeah,
I should have taken equity.
And then we have Justin Hall with us, and Justin is one of the legendary players in the internet over the last 20 years. He operates out of bud.com, and Justin's links were one of the earliest sort of community stories on the internet. Justin spent some time this last year as a recruiter, and he's gone back to startup land, so we're going to get Justin's recruiting perspective and maybe a little bit of why you want to go to a startup. Want to say hello, Justin?
Woo!
Yeah, nice. How you got a tie? I've never seen you in a tie. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I read in the New York Times that ties are completely out. It's about time you got one, I guess, huh?
Exact time to get in. Yeah, exactly.
That exact time to get in when the market hits its bottom. Okay, so we've got a set of questions that we're going to work with. And first of all, who's going to take, what do you think of pair programming?
That was me.
That's you, Don. What do you think of pair programming?
Well, my answer to that kind of interview question is to reply back to the employer and say, you know, pair programming works great in certain circumstances when the company has two programmers that you can allocate to do the job. But there's some great benefits with pair programming. You can get some programs done faster. You have better designs and fewer bugs. You can reduce the defects. And it also creates more of a collaborative environment where people can get things done more quickly and more problem solving. They brainstorm off of each other, and there's also knowledge sharing. So it could be a very beneficial situation if the company has the two people to allocate in that perspective. You have one person who's basically the driver who's writing the code, and another person who's doing the observation, who's doing kind of the quality assurance part of it and keeping the strategy in place. So it could be a really great situation, and if that's what your company is looking to do, then I'd be very open to doing that. So that would be a great interview question response. And really what the insight to that is really the employer's probing to find out if the potential employee is looking to work with others, if there's a sense of accountability, and really ultimately, what is your teamwork ability, and if you're capable of brainstorming off of somebody else, that's a valuable thing. And ultimately, the biggest thing is what's your quality control perspective. and having that other person that's helping you stay on track, that can really have a great way to create a dynamic to really come up with a top quality product.
So if you're like me and you haven't got the slightest idea what pair programming is, how do you answer the question?
Okay, well, pair programming, you would have to break it down, and that is something you need to consider when you're interview. How much do they know? The person who may be talking to you, they may not have a lot of technical expertise, and oftentimes that's the case. They are not in that particular role themselves, so they don't quite understand it. So you do have to take the time to break down the language in a way that they can understand it. So they may ask the question about pair programming, and you can answer it, the question that I just got, but also explain what pair programming means. And so I did answer that to a certain degree, but I put it towards the end of my discussion, saying that the pair programming is when you have two people, one person's the coder and the other person's the observer/navigator. And so understanding and describing what the roles are and then describing the advantages of it, that might be a better way of going about it, actually.
So let me ask that another way. I don't know what pair programming is. How would my answer to the question is, beats the crap out of me what you're talking about.
If you're the candidate?
If I'm the candidate and I don't know what you're talking about, how do I answer that gracefully without just totally blowing the interview?
That's a good question. You should do enough research so you should be able to anticipate that kind of thing, especially if you're dealing with agile software development. So one thing you can say is there's nothing wrong with asking, can you clarify it with pair programming? What does that mean? If you can't understand, I mean, pair programming, it's pretty self-explanatory to a certain degree, but you can ask the question, say, can you please describe what you mean by pair programming, because it means different things to different companies. I mean, if you want to play that, that's kind of a lame way of doing it, but you can always ask a clarification question before you make a mistake.
Okay, so it's okay to say I don't know in an interview? Sometimes
if you don't know, it's better to be honest than to bluff your way through it, because if you act like, if you fake it till you make it, eventually you're going to get caught if you don't know what that term means. And that's a huge problem. Sometimes people, they do fake it and they say yes, 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 and give the employer everything they want, but when it comes down to it and they get hired, they still don't know what it is or know how to do it, then that's a problem.
Yeah. John, can I interject?
Sure, please. You don't know either.
Yeah, I had no idea what pair programming was when I saw the question, and if I was an applicant and I knew that that was on the job spec, I'm going to Google it, I'm going to look it up on Wikipedia, right? And so I'm going to have my own definition in my head about what pair programming is. And then to Don's point, I'm going to iterate my answer based on how that employer might use it. So if they're an agile shop and they're asking about pair programming, then I'm going to use my answer in that way. So do your research beforehand if you're going in for an interview.
Exactly.
Great. Okay, so let's go to the next question. If you designed an elevator for Bill Gates, how would you test it? And that, I think, is for you, Justin.
Well, I think all these questions are, sort of specific, and they're filters that employers can use to say, am I going to get along with this person? Will this person be able to contribute to our group effort? And so in some ways, how would you design the perfect elevator for Bill Gates? As a candidate, I would be amused to answer, well, I would first go to Bill Gates and say, Bill, maybe we should take the stairs because that's better for your legs. I think, thinking about these questions as having a right answer is not necessarily the right way to think about these questions. These questions are just a way that people have of trying to figure out if you're going to be able to think creatively with them and solve problems together. So, to the last question, what is pair programming? I mean, if somebody asked me that question, are you comfortable with pair programming, and I didn't know the answer, I would say, look, I would love to learn about pair programming, because if that's a technique that you guys use to do better, then I want to learn, but I don't, going in and saying, boy, there's 50 things I need to know to work in this industry, and I know 49 of them, and I got to learn the 50th. That's probably not the way it works. It's more like, are you responsive? Are you able to think on your feet? And so with regards to the elevator for Bill Gates, I would be thinking, yeah, like, Bill, you'll be happier if you take the stairs. You'll run into more people, better in the event of a fire. those are the things that I'm thinking in response to that question. But just overall thinking about questions, I would just encourage anyone listening to this to not think that if you're going in for an interview, you have to have the right answer. You are the right answer. And if you aren't the right answer, then you don't want to work at that company.
Cool. So you're at the interview. Somebody asks you, how would you design an elevator for Bill Gates? And you think it's the dumbest thing you've ever heard of. What do? Is it time to get up and go catch the bus home?
Well, I mean, when on either side of the table, I find, if you think of life as an experiment, I think though that's a moment to go direct, to just go, I think you're asking me that question because you want to stump me, or you want to see if I can think creatively. Well, when I walked in, I noticed that your company didn't have any water for the employees. So I noticed this guy carrying this cup. There's all different kinds of ways you can sort of say, I see what you're trying to do with that question, and I want to bring my skills to bear. And if you don't think that question is a way for you to be creative and showcase what you're good at, then you find some other way to engage them. But I love being in that moment of you're in an interview, and isn't an interview a strange and particular human exercise where everybody, I see these guys come in and interview and they put on a suit. It looks like they haven't worn the suit for like a year. And then they wear the suit and they come in and they're sort of stiff and they're sort of like trying to get the right answer. And it's like, no, man, this is a conversation. This is about you using the question to be able to tell a story that you want, or to be playful with me.
That's great. That's remarkable advice. So Jeremy, I forget which question you were going to ask. Would you ask yourself a question?
Well, it was about, I think it's, yeah, I can ask myself a question. I'll hang out with myself on Google.
How is it that you are so awesome?
How is it that I'm so awesome? Geez. Let's see if I can mash this up. So I think my question was, if you don't have a great spec, how could you build something in the land of recruiting, which is where my expertise lies? If you don't have a job description or don't know what you're looking for, or maybe you're a candidate or an applicant that doesn't exactly know what they want to do in their career, how do you be awesome in that moment? I think you let your personality shine. I think we all have a unique personality, and some of us are skilled in recruiting, some of us are skilled in job development, sales, whatever it is, and there's a bunch of people that have that same skill set. But what's unique to us as individuals is our personality. So if you do the job and you work hard and you work smart and you bring your personality to bear, and you're not a jerk, right? You're a nice person and you're unique and you be yourself. I think that provides you a competitive advantage against others that play the part and forget about the human element, which is who they are as a person. So my advice would be, if you don't have specifics on what you're looking for, what you're trying to do, or what you're trying to build, just be yourself and bring your valuable skills to an employer, and you should be fine. You should be awesome.
That's great. That's great. So I'm going to head back to you, Don.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
Okay, and just to kind of capitalize on what Jared just said, everybody, and I see this all the time as a career management coach, so a lot of people don't know how to answer the question, why should I hire you? Because this is the first conversation where they're actually trying to articulate what their value is. So it's marrying those personal attributes that Jared was just talking about into a way that's creating value towards an employer. So, again, you could have 25 people that can do the job the same way, but it's really going to be the personality and what is it that you want to see? What's that personality spark you want to see in that person if you're the employer that's going to make you want to hire that one person over the rest of the 24? So again, it's understanding what your value is. And a lot of it is your personal drive and who you are and how you interact and all that kind of thing. So it's really your personal brand, really.
Cool. So every time I've ever been in an interview situation where something important like a job was hanging, somewhere during that conversation, I get really nervous and forget where I am because it's a really important time, and I'm trying as hard as I can. And each of you have talked about finding a way to get in the moment. It'd be really cool if, starting with Justin, if we talk about how do you get in the moment when you're in that sort of a stressy situation? How do you do that?
Well, I did something that I think was borderline obnoxious when I was a recruiter, which is I would walk in the room and there would be someone sitting across the table from me and they'd applied for a job, and then I would just sit there in silence with them smiling for a little while. Because, they're waiting for me to start asking them, why are you awesome, and how would you build an elevator for Bill Gates, and do you know what pair programming is? And I'm just wanting to say, hey, look, we're human right now. We're breathing the same air. We both probably brushed our teeth this morning. Let's just come into that for a moment. And so I think also as a candidate, it's very important to remember all interviews are two-way. Even if you really need that job, even if you've got something hanging on the line, you want to make sure these are people who are going to treat you with respect, who are going to allow you to grow, who are going to give you learning opportunities. You've got your own questions to answer. And I believe that as a candidate, when you come into that awareness that you are also interviewing these employers, that can give you a confidence that brings you into that moment. And maybe it's also you holding that space where you get asked a question and you just take a moment to sit in silence. I once read a profile of Osama bin Laden, and the journalist said, look, when I asked this guy a question, he would take 90 seconds to answer. 90 seconds, that's a long silence. But that's a lot of confidence, and it's him gathering his thoughts. So if you think about, you're in an interview, somebody asks you a question, it kind of rocks you, and you're like, holy smokes, you say, and you just hold that confidence that you're there with them. I don't know, that's sort of weird advice, but I mean, I think basically just be aware that you're there to interview, and that something's going to happen to you no matter what.
Okay, how about you, Don? What do you do to get in the moment in the middle of the interview?
Well, I think a lot of people, I call it overthinking the situation. They start putting a lot of pressure on themselves, thinking, oh my gosh, what are the outcomes? And they forget to talk and have that conversation in the moment. They're thinking, okay, oh my gosh, I didn't answer that question correctly. So then they think, uh-oh, turn off the lights, close the door, the interview's over, I've lost it. And instead of being more in the moment and taking the different kind of avant-garde approach that Justin was sort of discussing, it is just a conversation. And if you overthink it and overhype yourself up, that's where people get in trouble. You just need to relax and be confident and be centered on who you are, what your value is to the employer. And, all the times of discussing this job, this is the time to be the most excited, because they're excited to come talk to you. You're excited to come talk to them. Just be in that moment of saying, are we really a good match? Let's talk about the culture. How are we going to get along, and how can I help you, and that kind of thing. So it's really just not pressuring yourself. That's the biggest thing.
Cool. How about you, Jeremy? What do you think?
Well, I'm a storyteller, so I always default to telling stories. Obviously, the employer or hiring manager that's interviewing you as a candidate is after, do they have the skill set? Is it a culture fit, to our earlier points? And what kind of value, obviously, do you bring above any other candidate? So if those are the three things they want, the best is to tell a story about how you've handled a situation, who you are as a person, what skill set you have. And if you do it in a narrative, if you just tell a story, you're going to feel more comfortable, more relaxed. You tell stories every single day. How was your day at work? What did you learn today at school? Those kinds of stories growing up. So just be comfortable in yourself and tell a story about, in HR we joke about, tell me about a time when. But if you come to the table, to the interview table with, this thing happened last month at work, and this is how we handled it, and this is what we thought about while we were dealing with the problem and solving it, and these are the skills we use. If you tell it in a narrative and tell a story, I think you'll feel more comfortable. The employer will get the gist of what it is value-wise that you bring, and it'll probably be a better outcome.
That's great.
Can I add something to what Jared just said?
Please.
I think Jared's point about storytelling is very important. And I think when I was a recruiter and a hiring manager, I was most attracted to the candidates who'd done enough homework to have their own version of my company's story, and to have an understanding of how their story and my company's story could overlap. So to the question of how do you go into the moment and how do you get your confidence in an interview, I think homework. Put more wood behind fewer arrows. If you're applying to 100 companies, you can't really tell the story of all those companies and how you belong at those companies. But if you're only really passionate and going after 5 companies, well, then you can tell the story of why those 5 companies are great and how you see yourself at those.
I'd like to add something too, and just even before we get to the interview stage, I think most people fail on this part, and obviously I see a lot of this as a professional resume writer, but your resume is the place to start telling the stories. And too many times people are failing. They just, and especially on the technical side, I see so many resumes that include so much jargon, so much stuff that doesn't really tell the story of what did you actually do. And that's a huge problem. And you just can't list your job duties in a resume anymore. You can use that as a place to start telling, how did you make it better? How did you make improvements? What problems did you solve? How did you help the company make money, or save time? So the more stories you can use, the challenge, action, result formula to telling stories on your resume, that could be the jumping off points and help you sort of get your pump prime for the interview, so you have more things to talk about there. And instead of just focusing on the job duties, 100 people could do the same job duties. What have you actually done? What's the so what there? And if you could do that in the resume process, that'll help you be a more effective interviewee because you've already thought about these things.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and one other thing, this is great conversation. So if you're in tech, obviously, as a DICE user, you can list all the different types of Java development you've done, to Don's point, right? But you might struggle thinking about what your story is. You might think, I don't know how my personal story might fit into work, and you're an engineer, so you don't think that way necessarily. What I would say as a starting point is look at the application, or whatever it is that you built, whatever that product was, and list that on your profile. So you did Java development, great. You have engineering background, great. You don't know what your personal story is or how that fits into the overall narrative, and that might be something that doesn't make sense to you. So what you could do is talk about what the application did, right? So I coded something in Java that did this, and this was good for the end user because of X, Y, and Z. So, if you're making an app that helps people find directions, don't just list Java developer and software development kit or mobile app or whatever it is. Also talk about, and it helped the user find directions or something. And then that ties it all together for us in recruiting.
Great. Okay, so the next question on the list I'm going to use as something that we can all kick around. Well, that question is, where did the development of healthcare.gov go wrong, and how would you fix it? Okay, but the first thing is, I'm sure there's an interviewer out there asking that question today. Why in the world would somebody ask a question like that in an interview? Justin?
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, well, somebody's got to
I think part of the value of a question like that is it does show, does someone read the news, and is someone up to date, and can someone think about how they want to solve large social civic problems? I mean, I recently gave up periodicals because I wanted to reclaim that time, so I haven't actually been following the pain of people applying for healthcare on the web, but so I would fail that question from a how could I do it better, except that I would say, I think people in San Francisco have this view that you can build things iteratively and post them on the web, and people in Washington, D.C. have constituencies that we can't even imagine, that the number of people that they're serving and the fact that some of them are still on Internet Explorer 4 and all that kind of stuff that people in San Francisco have long left behind. So I'm not sure I'm a sympathetic candidate to be asked that question and speak to it, with an informed mind and a warm heart.
Yeah, I'll go next. If we're kicking this around, and I hang out on the internet a lot, so again, I don't have too much time for the news. I try to hit up my Flipboard every day and see what's trending and all of that. But my personal opinion is that it probably had too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many vendors, too much overlap, too much bureaucracy, obviously. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And then not enough testing. To Justin's point, let's try it on IE4. Let's dial up my grandma's PC and see what happens, right? So that's what I would have done, is more testing, less cooks in the kitchen, and yeah, those have been my two biggest pieces of advice if Barack's listening. So.
Yes, yes. He's right over there.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Don?
Well, I think getting a question like that really requires you to have a detailed problem analysis type of perspective, because obviously there's some root causes there, and even bandwidth might even be an issue when it sounds like from what I've read, it's just been overwhelmed and crashing, and that's not acceptable, obviously. But there's a certain amount of pressure when you have such a high-profile, highly politicked website that's being unveiled with a lot of expectations and some legal ramifications being attached to it, that you have to have healthcare by a certain date, and a lot of people are feeling a lot of pressure. So in that kind of situation, it will require a lot of root cause analysis and understanding what the technical requirements are. Maybe there's some misunderstandings or miscommunications, and I think that might be attributed to the bureaucracy issues. So, there's a lot of different layers to this issue, and it would require someone who has some exceptional problem-solving abilities, and as well as communications abilities, to be able to talk to the people to find out what those requirements were and what went wrong, really. And it's not so much finger pointing, but let's get this thing working, because there's a lot of pressure on right now.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much. So, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. So one other bit real quick. So if you're tailoring your, oops, I just hit my microphone. If you're tailoring your response, or you should be tailoring your response. So if you're interviewing at a hardware company, then tailor it to redundancies and why didn't they have another stack and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. If you're at a software company, tailor it to that testing. Or if they're an agile shop and they do 2-week code release, tailor it to that. So I would weave in your personal opinion is important. Weave in your skill set's important. We talked about those things. But make sure you tailor your response to your audience, depending on what kind of company you're working for, whether it's hardware, software, apps, whatever. Most companies are a mix of all three, so just be careful, but tailor your response when you're given a scenario-based question like John gave us.
Well, and one more thing on that point, tailor your response. I would imagine that could slightly backfire if you thought, well, I think I'm interviewing at a liberal company, so I'll talk about how it wasn't Obama's fault, but I think I'm interviewing with a guy from Texas, so I will talk about how, if we only got rid of government altogether, we'd be in better shape. That's probably a dangerous territory.
Yes, avoid politics. What is it? Politics, sex, religion, and money?
Don't avoid money.
Don't avoid money.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up. If you would, give people an idea where to follow you or find you on the various internets. Justin, why don't you tell people how to get a hold of you?
Okay, I was about to take a piece of paper and write it, but as you can see, it's blank. I didn't get that far. So I have two things. On Twitter, I'm at JAH, which means that you can follow me, and if you like Rastafarianism, that also works, JAH. And then the other one, I have a website, which is at links.net, LINKS.net, where my website turns 20 next year, and there's way too much information about me there.
Good, good. Jer?
I killed my camera trying to write. I didn't get very far as well. I was looking for a pin. It's very difficult to find a pin in this office. Jer425 on Twitter, so that's JER425. You can also find me on LinkedIn. So look for Jer, J-E-R on LinkedIn. There's a ton of us, I'm sure. But JER425 on Twitter is the best, Jer425.
Great. And Don, how do people get a hold of you and your wonderful resume writing service?
Okay, I'm on Twitter at Dawn, D-A-W-N, Rasmussen, R-A-S-M-U-S-S-E-N, and my website is pathfindercareers.com, and I'm also on LinkedIn.
Great. And I'm John Sumser. You can find me at John Sumser or at thehrexaminer.com. It's been a pleasure being with you guys today, and let's all give Dice a little bit of thanks. How's that? Applause on the internet. Thanks, Dice, and thank you guys for being on. I think we're through.